The TV studio was buzzing with energy long before the cameras began rolling. Bright lights hung overhead, casting a warm glow on the rows of seats filled with an expectant audience. Excited chatter mixed with laughter as crew members hurried across the floor, checking microphones, adjusting cameras, and making sure everything was perfect for the evening's show. Everyone knew that tonight was supposed to be a fun, light-hearted segment. One of those moments designed to make people laugh and forget the world for a little while. In the middle of all this, there was a guest who looked much less prepared than anyone else in the room. They sat quietly in the makeup chair, trying to blend into the background while stylists applied the finishing touches. The guest had not expected to be in the spotlight tonight. Their life had been mostly ordinary, filled with regular jobs and small personal dreams that seemed too quiet to ever be noticed by anyone. They had never imagined standing on a live TV set in front of hundreds of people and countless cameras, all waiting to laugh at what the producers called a fun little bit. The host, famous for their quick wit and humor, walked in with a confident stride. They had a natural ability to make the audience laugh, to turn a simple sentence into a punchline that would get applause. The guest watched them closely, trying to remember that this was all meant to be lighthearted. The host greeted the audience with their usual charm, waving and smiling as the crowd cheered. Then, turning toward the guest, the host made a playful comment that was meant to be a joke. It was one of those lines that could have been said to anyone, just a way to get the audience laughing quickly. The audience responded immediately, laughing loudly. The guest smiled politely, feeling a little embarrassed, but also curious about how this evening would unfold. They could feel their heart beating faster, a mix of nervousness and excitement. The cameras captured every reaction, zooming in on faces, hands, and eyes, making the moment feel even bigger than it really was. Even though it was meant to be a small joke, the guests couldn't help but notice how everyone's attention was suddenly on them as the segment continued. The host encouraged the guests to join in on the joke. The idea was simple. Take part in a short, funny challenge that would give the audience a reason to cheer and laugh. The guest hesitated for a moment. They were used to staying quiet, blending in, avoiding attention. But something in the way the host smiled, in the way the audience leaned forward, made them realize that saying yes might be a way to enjoy the moment instead of running from it. So they agreed, carefully, trying to keep their nerves under control. The crew signaled that everything was ready. Cameras rolled, lights shone brightly, and the audience quieted down, sensing that something new was about to happen. The guests to the center of the stage, joking and laughing as if they were old friends. The guests tried to mirror the laughter, trying to relax and enjoy the experience, even though a small knot of anxiety remained in their stomach. They had no idea that this simple moment, meant to be nothing more than a joke, was about to become unforgettable. The challenge itself was silly and harmless. It involved a little improvisation, moving around on stage and playing along with the host's quick questions. At first, the audience laughed simply at the awkwardness, the nervous smiles, and the way the guests tried to keep up. But as the guests continued, something subtle began to change. They started to relax, finding a rhythm in the interaction, letting small parts of their personalities show through. Their gestures became more natural, their voice steadier, and the audience began to notice that there was more to this guest than the host's playful jokes suggested. While the audience laughed, some began to pay attention in a new way. There was a spark in the guest's eyes, a confidence growing quietly but steadily. The host, too, began to notice it, adjusting their usual routine to allow the guest more space. The segment that was supposed to be light and fleeting started to feel different. It was no longer just about a joke. It was about a person who had quietly waited for a moment to be seen in the makeup of the lights and cameras. The guest felt a small thrill. They were discovering something about themselves in front of strangers, something that had always been hidden. Every movement, every word seemed to resonate differently now. The audience's laughter had changed. To it wasn't just laughter. At a joke, it was laughter mixed with curiosity, with wonder, as people tried to understand who this guest really was. The energy in the room shifted, almost imperceptibly at first, but clearly enough for those paying attention. The host, sensing the change, decided to push the playful challenge a little further. The audience laughed at the host's exaggeration. But now the guest responded in a way that surprised everyone. They added a small twist, a tiny performance within the joke that made people lean forward and watch more closely. The laughter was still there, but it was mixed with anticipation. People wanted to see what this guest would do next. It was as if the joke had opened a door and the guest was slowly stepping through it, revealing something unexpected and captivating. Backstage, the crew watched with quiet excitement. They had seen many guests over the years, but rarely someone who could transform a simple, planned joke into something more meaningful so quickly. The producers exchanged glances, realizing that the segment was no longer just about humor. It was becoming a moment that might linger in the minds of everyone present. The audience, still laughing, was also starting to sense that they were witnessing something special. It was subtle, almost invisible. But the connection between the guest and the room had begun. The guest could feel the change too, the nerves were still there, but they were tempered by a growing sense of courage. They were discovering that they could hold the attention of hundreds of people, that their presence alone could shift the energy of a room. It was thrilling and terrifying at the same time. As the host, noticing the guests' increasing comfort, stepped back slightly, giving them space to shine in small ways. The laughter softened, replaced by attention and focus. The room was ready for something new, even if no one knew exactly what it would be. For the guest, this moment was a turning point, though they didn't realize it yet. They had come into the studio expecting to be part of a simple joke, expecting to laugh along and then leave. But now they were beginning to understand that they could do more than react. They could participate. They could create. They could capture attention without trying too hard. Each movement, each word, was becoming part of a subtle performance that drew people in, without anyone quite knowing why. The segment continued and the guests' confidence grew. The host encouraged them further, allowing small improvisations and responses that were not part of the script. The audience noticed these small differences, the little moments where the guest's personality shone through. People laughed, yes, but they also leaned in, curious about this unexpected depth. What had started as a joke was turning into something more layered, more human, more memorable by the end of the segment. The guest had moved from nervous participant to quiet center of attention. The audience's laughter had shifted into a mixture of amusement, appreciation, and intrigue. The host smiled, realizing that the joke had done more than entertain. It had revealed a hidden talent, a spark of something that no one had expected. Backstage, crew members whispered to each other, excited by what they had witnessed. The energy in the room was palpable, alive with the possibility that this was just the beginning of something bigger. When the cameras finally cut, the applause from the live audience continued. The guest, still smiling, felt a wave of emotion. Relief, pride, and excitement all mingled together. They had survived the moment they feared, and more than that, they had discovered a strength they hadn't known they possessed. It was a simple beginning, a moment that had started as a TV joke, but it had become a step toward something extraordinary. For the first time, the guest felt that perhaps their life could hold moments of real recognition and joy, even in places they had never imagined. The host came over, clapping gently, offering words of encouragement that were sincere and warm. The guest nodded, still processing what had just happened. The audience continued to chatter and laugh, but there was a new tone now, then a quiet acknowledgement that something special had emerged unexpectedly. The lights dimmed slightly, and the crew began to reset for the next segment, but the guest remained in the center of their own thoughts, aware that this moment had shifted something deep inside them. It was only the beginning. The joke had served its purpose, but the guest had transformed it into an opportunity. The energy they felt, the attention they commanded, and the unexpected thrill of performing in front of so many people would linger long after the cameras stopped rolling. They had discovered that even in a moment meant to be fleeting and trivial, there was a chance to reveal oneself, to take a small step toward something bigger, something that could touch the hearts of those around them. And so, the evening continued. The audience unaware that they had just witnessed the first spark of a journey that would change the guest's life forever. In that simple, ordinary beginning, under the bright lights and surrounded by laughter, A story had quietly begun, one that would lead to a moment none of them would ever forget. The guests walked back to their seat after the first segment, their hands still trembling slightly, but now with a new sense of confidence. The laughter from the audience still echoed in their ears, but it no longer felt like it was at their expense. It had become something different, a moment of shared energy that included them rather than excluded them. They sat quietly, trying to calm their racing heart, while the host chatted with the audience, keeping the energy alive for the next part of the show. As the next segment began, the producers decided to build on the unexpected spark the guest had shown. They suggested a small, improvised activity, still meant to be humorous, but with a little more room for creativity. The guest hesitated. Improvisation was not something they were used to, but the warm response from the audience gave them courage. They realized that if they could find a way to be themselves, even in a playful way, the moment could turn into something truly enjoyable, rather than just stressful. The host leaned in, smiling, and explained the new activity. The idea was silly on the surface, almost childlike, designed to make people laugh without asking for too much effort. The audience clapped and cheered, ready for entertainment. The guests took a deep breath, remembering how nervous they had felt only minutes ago. This time, however, they felt a strange calmness underneath the nerves, a quiet determination to see what could happen if they let go and participated fully. When it was their turn, the guests stepped forward again, a little slower than before, but with more awareness. The host started the playful prompts, tossing jokes and playful challenges into the air. At first, the guests responded cautiously, trying not to trip over words or actions. But soon, something shifted. They found themselves laughing, along with the host, not at themselves, but with the audience and the shared silliness of the moment. The nervous tension in their shoulders eased, replaced by a small growing joy. It was a delicate balance. The guest was aware that the activity was meant to be funny, and yet it also gave them a chance to show more of who they really were. They had spent so many years hiding their personality, trying not to stand out, worried about judgment from others. But here, on this bright stage, in front of a lively crowd, they felt a strange freedom. Each small gesture, each playful response, carried a piece of their true self, and the audience responded with curiosity and warmth, not just laughter. As the segment continued, the host decided to escalate the challenge slightly, asking the guests to do something unexpected. A simple task, almost trivial, but enough to put the guest in a position where they could reveal even more of their creativity. The guest hesitated for a second, then smiled, realizing that they could handle this. They moved with purpose, and in those small, careful actions, the audience began to notice a subtle talent, a kind of charm that was unforced and authentic. People in the audience leaned forward, paying closer attention. The laughter that had filled the room at the beginning of the show was still there, but it was layered now with surprise and interest. The guests' movements and words were no longer just reactions to a joke. They were becoming a performance of their own, small and understated but compelling. Even the crew behind the cameras exchanged quiet, excited glances. They had seen many guests over the years, but few could transform a planned joke into something more meaningful so quickly. The host, sensing the shift, decided to give the guest even more space. They asked questions in a way that encouraged creativity, allowing the guests to respond in their own manner. The audience noticed the change in rhythm and tone, and the energy in the room became almost electric. People laughed, yes, but they also began to watch, intrigued by what this ordinary-looking guest could do next. It was as if the joke had opened a door, and the guest was stepping through it, revealing a hidden depth that had never been seen before. The guest began to experiment with small improvisations, adding gestures and expressions that were natural and effortless. They discovered that they could make the audience react not just with laughter, but with engagement and curiosity. It was an eye-opening moment. They had never realized how much impact they could have simply by being themselves. The audience, meanwhile, was beginning to sense that they were witnessing something genuine, something unscripted, yet full of charm. Each interaction built upon the previous one. The host asked playful questions, The guest answered in unexpected ways, and the audience's reaction evolved from amusement to genuine interest. The laughter became warmer, more appreciative, and occasionally, it shifted to quiet attention as the audience watched the guests' every move. People were leaning forward in their seats, smiling, whispering to each other, and occasionally nodding in approval. This simple activity, intended to be a joke, was transforming into an authentic performance that drew the audience in. Backstage, the crew and producers were quietly thrilled. They had planned for humor, but they hadn't anticipated this. The guest was turning a lighthearted joke into a series of moments that felt human, relatable, and compelling. They had a natural ability to connect with people, to draw them in with subtle expressions and sincere reactions. It was a reminder that sometimes the most powerful moments on television were the ones that happened spontaneously. When real people revealed their true selves, the guest could feel a quiet excitement building within them. The nervousness had not disappeared entirely, but it had transformed into anticipation and curiosity. They were discovering a new side of themselves, one that could respond quickly, think creatively, and hold the attention of hundreds of people. Each small success in the improvisation added to their confidence, and each audience reaction reinforced the realization that they were capable of more than they had ever imagined. By the middle of the segment, the audience was fully engaged. The laughter had softened into an attentive silence at times, a mix of amusement and curiosity. They could sense that this was not just a joke anymore, that the guest was bringing something unique to the stage. People were watching not just to laugh, but to see what would happen next. It was a rare and beautiful transformation, and it created a kind of shared experience between the guest and the audience that was subtle but powerful. The guest, now more comfortable, began to take small risks in their responses. They added tiny gestures, unexpected facial expressions, and small improvisational elements that the host hadn't even planned for. The audience responded immediately, laughing and clapping, but now with genuine delight rather than polite amusement. The guests realized that they had found a rhythm, a way to be both part of the joke and independent within it. This duality made the performance feel natural, authentic, and memorable. The host, recognizing the moment, stepped back further and allowed the guests to guide the interaction. The energy in the studio shifted noticeably. What had started as a playful challenge was now a collaborative experience between the guest, the host, and the audience. Everyone was contributing to the moment, and the guests felt a deep sense of belonging. They were no longer just a participant in a joke. They were an active creator of a unique, shared experience. The segment began to build toward its conclusion. The guests had grown in confidence and comfort, responding quickly, improvising naturally, and engaging the audience in a way that was both unexpected and captivating. The laughter had evolved into a mixture of appreciation and curiosity. As people noticed the subtle nuances of the guests' performance, even the most skeptical viewers would have had to admit that something special was happening on stage. As the final moments of the segment approached, the guests took a small, deliberate action, a final improvisation that drew immediate applause. The audience's reaction was a mix of laughter, surprise, and admiration. The host clapped along, smiling broadly, acknowledging the guests' natural talent. Backstage, crew members whispered and nodded, excited by the transformation that had taken place so quickly. It was clear that the segment had moved beyond its original purpose. Becoming a meaningful and memorable moment, the guests returned to their seat. Breathing deeply, feeling exhilarated and slightly overwhelmed, they had not only participated in a joke, they had turned it into something memorable. Something that revealed their true self in a subtle but powerful way. The audience continued to react, clapping and laughing, but there was also a new sense of respect and admiration in the room. The guest realized that they had crossed an invisible line, from nervous participant to confident performer, and it was a thrilling, almost magical sensation. As the cameras paused and the host prepared for the next segment, the guests sat quietly, reflecting on what had just happened. They had taken a risk by participating fully, by allowing themselves to be seen, and it had paid off in ways they had not anticipated. The simple joke, intended to entertain, had become a turning point, a moment of discovery and empowerment. They felt a new confidence growing, a sense that they could face challenges, perform, and connect with others in ways they had never imagined. The audience, still energized, had witnessed the beginning of something extraordinary. The laughter and attention had transformed into something more human and meaningful. The guest had shown that even in a moment designed for humor, there could be authenticity, creativity, and connection. It was a lesson in the power of being oneself, even when the world expects only a joke. The guest, quietly smiling, knew that the journey was just beginning, and that the rest of the evening and perhaps their life held even greater possibilities than they had ever dreamed. The guest had started to feel a rhythm with the host and the audience. Every movement, every word felt lighter and more natural. The nerves were still there, but they had transformed into a quiet energy, a readiness to respond and participate fully. The host, noticing this change, decided it was time to escalate the segment. What had been a playful joke and minor improvisation was now becoming something more daring. Something that would truly test the guest's ability to connect and respond on the spot. The host leaned in with a mischievous smile. Announcing a small challenge that seemed simple but required quick thinking, the audience clapped and cheered, eager to see how the guest would handle it. For a moment, the guest froze, aware that all eyes were on them. The room went silent, as if holding its breath, waiting for the next move. It was a strange feeling, exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. The guest realized that they could either retreat into safety or step forward and show something new. Taking a deep breath, the guests chose to step forward. Their voice, which had been slightly hesitant, came out steady and confident. They responded to the challenge with a small twist, an unexpected answer that caused the audience to laugh in surprise. But it wasn't just laughter, it was laughter mixed with curiosity. People leaned forward in their seats, watching more closely, trying to understand who this guest really was. The energy in the studio had shifted. What had begun as a lighthearted joke now carried a sense of anticipation. The host, impressed, gave the guest more room to act. They asked questions and set up prompts that required quick thinking and creativity. The guest rose to the occasion, improvising in ways that were clever, subtle, and engaging. Each response drew a reaction, not just laughter, but attention and admiration. The audience could feel that they were witnessing something unscripted, authentic, and alive. This was no longer just entertainment. It was a connection forming between the guest and everyone watching. Backstage, the crew watched quietly, thrilled by the transformation. They had seen many guests participate in playful segments. Rarely had they seen someone turn a joke into something that commanded genuine attention. The guest's ability to adapt, respond, and subtly guide the energy of the room was remarkable. Every small gesture, every clever response added to the growing engagement. The host noticed it too. Stepping back slightly to let the guest's talent shine even more, the audience laughed and applauded. But now the room was filled with a tension that was exciting rather than uncomfortable. People were waiting, anticipating the next move. The guest realized that they had gained control of the moment in a way that felt natural. They were no longer just reacting. They were participating actively, influencing the rhythm of the interaction. It was a delicate balance. They felt alive in a way they hadn't felt before. The host decided to push things further, presenting a scenario that was unpredictable. It required the guests to think on their feet, respond quickly, and engage with the audience directly. The guest paused for a moment, feeling the pressure, but then a small smile appeared. They realized that this was an opportunity to show more than just humor, to reveal a layer of personality, creativity, and authenticity. They accepted the challenge with a nod, stepping into the spotlight fully. As the segment progressed, the guests' responses became increasingly inventive. They used gestures, expressions, and timing in ways that were subtle but powerful. The audience noticed immediately. The laughter now carried an element of surprise, admiration, and delight. It was clear that the guest was not just a participant in a joke, they were shaping the experience, creating moments that were engaging, authentic, and memorable. The host, Sensing the shift allowed the guest even more freedom. They asked open-ended questions and prompted scenarios that encouraged improvisation. The guest responded with small performances, adding nuance and personality that captivated the room. People in the audience were leaning forward, whispering to each other, and reacting not only to the humor, but to the creativity and confidence displayed. It was a subtle transformation, but powerful in its impact. Backstage, producers and crew members exchanged excited glances. They had seen many segments over the years, but rarely had a guest transformed a planned joke into something more meaningful and engaging so quickly. The guest was creating a moment that felt human, relatable, and compelling. Their confidence was growing with each interaction, and the audience was responding with attention and warmth. It was a perfect example of how authenticity could elevate even a playful joke into something unforgettable. The guests noticed the change in the room. People were watching intently, their focus no longer solely on the host, but on the guest's every movement and word. It was a subtle shift, but it made all the difference. The laughter became softer at times, replaced by curiosity and interest. The audience was drawn into the guest's energy, responding to the creativity and authenticity on display. The guests felt a surge of pride and exhilaration, realizing that they had captured the attention of hundreds of people without losing themselves in the process. The segment reached a turning point. The host presented a scenario that required the guest to perform a small, unexpected act. It was designed to surprise and amuse, but the guests saw it as an opportunity to do something more meaningful. They responded with a twist that was clever, heartfelt, and unexpected. The audience's reaction was immediate and electric. Laughter turned into cheers, and people began to clap enthusiastically. The host smiled, impressed, and even a few crew members exchanged quiet, excited nods. The moment had become larger than anyone had anticipated. The guest, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness, continued to engage with the audience. They used subtle gestures, facial expressions, and timing to enhance their responses. Each movement was deliberate, yet natural, creating a sense of flow that captivated the room. People laughed, clapped, and leaned forward, fully engaged. The host gave them space to shine, stepping back and allowing the guests' creativity and authenticity to take center stage as the segment drew closer to its conclusion. The guest felt a deep sense of accomplishment. They had transformed what was meant to be a simple joke into a series of moments that were engaging, memorable, and human. The audience's laughter was no longer just polite. It was genuine, filled with appreciation and surprise. People had begun to notice the guests' subtle charm, their creativity, and the way they had taken control of the moment without losing authenticity. The final moments of the segment were powerful. The guest executed a small, clever act that brought the audience to their feet, clapping and cheering. The host joined in, smiling broadly, acknowledging the guest's talent. Backstage, crew members whispered and nodded, excited by the performance. The energy in the room was electric, a mix of admiration, surprise, and joy. The segment had evolved from a playful joke into a remarkable, human-centered experience. When the cameras cut, the guests returned to their seat, breathing deeply and feeling a mixture of relief, pride, and exhilaration. They had faced the challenge, embraced improvisation, and connected with the audience in ways they had never imagined. The laughter and applause had been more than entertainment, it had been recognition. A moment of validation that felt deeply personal and profoundly human. The audience continued to chatter, clapping and smiling, but there was a new respect in the room. They had witnessed something authentic and memorable. The guest had taken a joke, an ordinary moment, transformed it into a performance filled with creativity, personality, and connection. It was a reminder of the power of authenticity, of the way real people can captivate others simply by being themselves. As the host prepared for the next segment, the guests sat quietly, reflecting on what had just happened. They had discovered a new side of themselves, one that could respond, improvise, and engage fully. The energy in the studio lingered, a tangible reminder of the impact of the guests' courage and creativity. The audience had been drawn in, not just by humor, but by the authenticity and human presence the guest had displayed. It was a moment that would remain long after the lights dimmed and the cameras stopped rolling. In that moment, the guest realized something profound. They had learned that even in a situation designed for humor, for a fleeting laugh, there was space for authenticity, for connection, and for genuine impact. They had taken a small, ordinary beginning and transformed it into something extraordinary, capturing the attention and admiration of everyone in the room, and while the segment had ended, the experience had planted a seed. A growing understanding of their own potential and the power of being fully present and true to themselves. The guest had reached a new level of confidence. But what happened next would change everything in ways they had not anticipated. The host, sensing that the audience was fully engaged, decided to introduce a final challenge. It was meant to be a humorous surprise, something playful that would close the segment with laughter. The audience clapped in anticipation, eager to see what would unfold. While the guest felt a mixture of excitement and nervous energy, they had come so far, and yet this moment felt bigger than anything they had experienced before. The host presented a prop, something simple, almost silly, and asked the guest to use it in a creative way. The audience laughed at the absurdity of the idea, expecting a light-hearted, quick joke. The guest, however, paused for a moment, noticing the silence that fell over the room as all eyes focused on them. In that instant, something shifted inside the guest. They realized that they could turn this playful challenge into something meaningful, something that would captivate the audience beyond mere laughter. Slowly, the guest picked up the prop and began to use it, not just as the host had intended, but in a way that revealed their personality and creativity. The audience noticed immediately that this was different. The laughter softened, replaced by curiosity and awe. Every movement was deliberate, every expression purposeful. The guests' confidence radiated, and people in the audience began to lean forward, sensing that they were witnessing something unusual, something special. The energy in the room changed. It was no longer just a joke. It was a performance that demanded attention. The host, slightly surprised, watched closely, realizing that the guest had transformed the moment. They had anticipated laughter and lighthearted fun, but the audience's reaction now was different. People were silent, captivated by the guest's actions, observing carefully. It was a rare moment where entertainment and authenticity met perfectly, creating a sense of shared experience that was electric. The guest felt a thrill and a deep sense of purpose, understanding that they were in control, shaping the moment in a profound way. The audience responded to the guest's creativity with visible astonishment. Eyes widened, hands clapped softly, and a few people whispered to each other, sharing the unspoken wonder that filled the room. The laughter that had been constant now paused, replaced by an attentive hush, a sign that the audience had shifted from amusement to genuine appreciation. The guest could feel the change, the energy vibrating through the studio, and it gave them even more courage to continue. As the challenge progressed, the guest added small improvisations, turning each movement into a story, each action into an expression that resonated deeply. The audience was no longer just watching, they were experiencing. The host, recognizing the shift, allowed the guest full freedom, providing minimal prompts and letting the moment evolve naturally. The interaction between the guest and the audience became a silent conversation, a rhythm of anticipation, surprise, and admiration. Backstage, the crew exchanged glances filled with excitement and disbelief. They had seen many live segments over the years, but this was unlike anything they had witnessed. The guest had taken a simple, planned joke and transformed it into something captivating and human. Every movement, every thoughtful response added layers of depth to the performance. The audience's reactions were genuine, spontaneous, and powerful, a testament to the guest's ability to connect and create a moment of true engagement. The guests noticed that the audience's attention was completely on them. People were no longer laughing casually, they were watching closely, fully absorbed in each action. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next movement, the next expression, the next unexpected moment. The guest felt a wave of exhilaration and fear simultaneously. They were performing in a way that went beyond humor, touching something real and human in everyone present. With each step, the guests became more confident. Their improvisation grew bolder, more expressive. They used subtle gestures, thoughtful timing, and even silence to build tension and anticipation. The audience responded instinctively, reacting not just with laughter, but with gasps, smiles, and quiet appreciation. Every small action carried meaning, and the room was fully engaged. The host watched, amazed, realizing that the segment had shifted from a scripted joke to a live performance of authenticity and human expression. The guest, aware of the effect they were having, felt a surge of energy. They moved with purpose, using the props and space to communicate ideas without words, expressing creativity and personality in ways that were subtle yet powerful. The audience leaned in, captivated, sensing the uniqueness of the moment. People who had come expecting simple amusement were now experiencing genuine intrigue and admiration. The studio, filled with bright lights and cameras, seemed to pause, holding this delicate, electric moment in time. Every audience member reacted differently, but all were drawn to the guest's presence. Some smiled quietly, appreciating the skill and creativity. Others whispered excitedly to neighbors, sharing the sense of wonder that filled the room. The laughter that had dominated earlier segments had faded, replaced by a collective focus and anticipation. The guests noticed the impact of each action, feeling both humbled and empowered. They understood that they had created a bridge, a connection that was entirely their own. Backstage, whispers of amazement continued. Producers and crew members were exchanging excited comments, marveling at how a simple joke had become an unforgettable, human-centered performance. They realized that the guest had achieved something rare, something that combined humor, creativity, and authenticity, captivating an audience in a way that felt genuine and alive. The guest's courage and improvisation had transformed an ordinary moment into something extraordinary. The host, fully aware of the shift in energy, chose to step back completely, allowing the guest to take full control. The audience now followed the guest's every move, fully engaged and responsive. Each action, each expression carried meaning and nuance. The room was alive with anticipation, a shared experience between performer and viewers that transcended simple entertainment. The guest had found a rhythm, a flow that drew people in naturally, effortlessly. Yet powerfully, as the challenge reached its climax, the guest performed a series of actions that were both clever and heartfelt. The audience reacted immediately, gasping, clapping, and whispering in amazement. The laughter returned, but it was layered with admiration and awe. People were no longer just responding to a joke, they were responding to skill, creativity, and authenticity. The guest had turned a playful challenge into a performance that resonated deeply with everyone present. The moment held, suspended in time, as the audience realized they were witnessing something rare. The guest's presence, creativity, and courage had transformed a simple segment into an experience that felt meaningful, human, and memorable. The host smiled, quietly impressed, understanding that they had facilitated something extraordinary rather than merely orchestrating a joke. Backstage, the crew could barely contain their excitement. This was the kind of moment that would be remembered long after the cameras stopped rolling. As the final action of the challenge concluded, the room erupted. The audience clapped loudly, cheered, and even gave a few spontaneous standing ovations. People were on their feet, smiling and applauding, some with tears in their eyes from the emotional impact of the performance. The guests stood quietly, overwhelmed, trying to take in the wave of energy and appreciation. They had transformed a simple, light-hearted challenge into a moment that no one would forget. The host stepped forward, genuinely impressed, offering praise and acknowledgement to the guest. The applause continued, filling the studio with warmth, joy, and admiration. The guest felt a mixture of relief, pride, and gratitude. They had taken a risk, stepped into the spotlight, and created something authentic and powerful. It was a rare and unforgettable moment, a testament to the impact of courage, creativity, and human presence. Backstage, crew members and producers discussed the performance in hushed, excited tones. They had expected humor, but they had witnessed something far greater. The guest had taken a joke, something intended to entertain briefly, and turned it into a performance that was meaningful, captivating, and human. It was a reminder that even in unexpected moments, true talent and authenticity could shine, leaving a lasting impression on everyone involved.